shimmered across the polished wood floors of Isabella Hartman's Pacific Heights mansion. Laughter and soft jazz spilled from the grand living room into the hallway, mingling with the faint scent of white gardenias, her favorite flower, arranged in every corner. Friends, colleagues, and clients had gathered to celebrate her 39th birthday, each guest raising a glass to toast her success and grace. She smiled for them, greeting each warmly, but her mind was already wandering. Nate, her husband of 14 years, had been strangely absent from most of the evening. She spotted him near the French doors, his hand brushing lightly against the back of Clara Benson, his paralegal. The contact was casual enough to escape notice, but not to Isabella. She had seen the way Clara looked at him before, at office functions, during charity galas, that lingering glance of someone who wanted more than professional respect. Tonight, however, there was something sharper in the air, something calculated in the way they exchanged a quick, almost secretive look before slipping away together. Curiosity, laced with unease, urged Isabella to follow. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she made her way down the hall, past the chatter and clinking glasses, toward the west wing where Nate's private library sat. The heavy mahogany door was slightly ajar, and a thin beam of warm lamplight cut across the shadowed corridor. She paused at the edge, heart thudding in her chest, and listened. "Everything's signed," Clara's voice came, low and smooth, tinged with satisfaction. "Once the guests leave, you can serve her. She won't have the strength to fight after tonight." Isabella's breath caught, but she stayed still, pressing her palm to the doorframe for balance. "Good," Nate replied, his tone businesslike, the same voice he used in court when sealing a victory. "The timing is perfect. She'll be emotional, off guard, and the offshore accounts, they're sealed tight. By the time she realizes what's happening, the Napa property, the vineyard, the Cayman transfers, all of it will be out of her reach." Clara's laugh was soft, almost indulgent. "She'll walk away with barely anything. You've covered every angle." Through the narrow gap, Isabella saw Clara leaning on Nate's desk, her tailored skirt riding just above the knee, and Nate in his navy suit, leaning back in the leather chair, fingers drumming on the divorce papers spread between them like a battle plan. He reached for her hand briefly, and the sight felt like a physical blow. A dozen memories flashed in Isabella's mind. Their honeymoon in Amalfi, long evenings planning their future, his promises that they were a team. Now, it all seemed like an elaborate lie. She swallowed hard, forcing back the sting in her eyes. This was neither the place nor the moment to collapse. Silently, she stepped back into the shadows and smoothed her dress. By the time she returned to the living room, her face was composed, the perfect hostess once more. Guests approached with smiles, offering birthday wishes and clinking glasses in her honor. She laughed, she thanked them, she even accepted Nate's toast from across the room, as though nothing in the world was wrong. Inside, however, something had shifted. The shock had burned away, leaving in its place a cold, steady flame. If Nate thought she would crumble, he was mistaken. He had his plan. Now, without him realizing, she would begin crafting hers. Tonight, she would give him his perfect party. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for the war he didn't know was coming. Isabella closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, letting the practiced smile fade from her face. The echo of Nate's voice from the library still rang in her ears, each word replaying with cruel clarity. She wanted to confront him right then, to throw the divorce papers in his face, but instinct told her that would only give him the advantage. Instead, she walked calmly to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and dialed Monica. Monica answered on the second ring, her voice warm but edged with concern. Are you okay? You left your own party for a while. I could tell something was wrong." Isabella's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I overheard Nate and Clara. They're planning to serve me divorce papers. Tonight, after the party." She paused, the bitterness rising. And they've hidden assets, offshore accounts, properties I didn't even know existed. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. You're serious? I wish I wasn't. Monica didn't hesitate. I'm calling Ethan. Now. Within minutes, Monica had looped in her brother, a forensic accountant with a reputation for uncovering frauds no one else could trace. His voice was calm, analytical. The key is not to tip him off, Ethan said. If he knows you found out, he'll accelerate whatever he's doing. You need to play along until we have enough to nail him. The three of them spoke quietly for nearly an hour, mapping out the first steps. Isabella would gather what she could from the house: financial statements, insurance records, anything that could show the flow of money. Ethan would start discreet background searches on shell companies tied to Nate's name. Monica would act as a buffer, giving Isabella excuses to be out of the house without raising suspicion. When the call ended, Isabella sat in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at her wedding ring. She thought about the little signs she had brushed aside these past months, the late nights at the firm, the urgent weekend meetings, the sudden change to a phone password she had once known by heart. She remembered the way he had pushed for the party to be held at home instead of the restaurant she'd chosen, insisting it would be more intimate. Now she understood. He had been setting the stage for her humiliation, but he had underestimated her. By the time she climbed into bed beside Nate, who was pretending to be engrossed in emails, her mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. She would keep her smile in place, keep the warmth in her voice, and let him think he was in control. Every conversation, every movement would be part of her own strategy. He might have written the first chapter of this betrayal, but she was about to take over the story. And when the ending came, it would be hers to write. And the occasional groan of the old wooden beams settling in the cool night air. Nate had retreated to the guest room hours ago, claiming he needed to review case files. Isabella lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds until she was certain his breathing had deepened into sleep. When the moment came, she slipped out from under the covers and padded barefoot across the carpet, her silk robe tied loosely around her waist. The library was at the far end of the hall, its heavy mahogany door closed. She eased it open and stepped inside, inhaling the faint scent of leather-bound books and Nate's cologne. Her eyes went straight to the framed black and white photograph of Napa Valley on the far wall. She reached up, lifted it carefully, and swung it aside to reveal the steel door of the wall safe. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, recalling the moment months ago when she had caught a glimpse of him entering the combination during the holidays. The numbers came easily to her, his father's birthday. She entered them slowly, the soft beep of each digit sounding far louder than she wanted. With a muted click, the safe unlocked. Inside was a neat stack of manila folders, each labeled in Nate's precise handwriting. Isabella's pulse quickened as she began pulling them out one by one, placing them on the desk. She used her phone to photograph each page. Bank statements showing large transfers to accounts she didn't recognize, property deeds for a vineyard in Napa purchased under an LLC she'd never heard of, wire confirmations to an account in the Cayman Islands. At the bottom of the stack, a small black velvet box caught her attention. She opened it to find a diamond bracelet, glittering even in the dim light, with a price tag still attached. It wasn't her taste, and she had never seen it before. The thought of Nate clasping it around Clara's wrist made her stomach twist. She was just slipping the last file back into place when the faint creak of the library door made her freeze. Nate stood in the doorway, wearing the navy robe she had bought him for their anniversary, his brow furrowed in mild confusion. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice low, not yet suspicious, but alert. Isabella forced herself to look up casually, placing a hand to her temple. "Couldn't sleep," she said, letting her voice sound tired. "I came looking for some aspirin. I thought there might be some in here from when you had that headache last month. She added a faint laugh. Guess I wasn't thinking straight. Nate's gaze lingered on her for a moment, as if weighing her words, then he nodded slowly. The aspirin's in the guest bathroom. You should get some rest. Right, she murmured, brushing past him with a sheepish smile. Too much champagne tonight, I guess. She walked away without looking back, her heart pounding, her phone warm in her pocket with the weight of what she had just captured. The headache she had claimed was a lie, but the ache in her chest was real, and it was only fueling her determination. Isabella left the house before sunrise, telling Nate she had an early meeting with a potential client. In truth, she drove across the city to a quiet cafe tucked between two art galleries in the Mission District, a place where no one from Nate's social circle would think to look for her. Monica was already there, seated in the back booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Beside her sat Ethan, looking sharp in a gray suit despite the early hour, and across from them was a man she instantly recognized from Monica's description, Graham Doyle, the divorce attorney known for dismantling high-profile opponents without leaving a legal trace. Isabella slid into the booth, lowering her voice. I found everything. Bank statements, property deeds, wire transfers, even proof of an account in the Cayman Islands. And she hesitated, her expression hardening. A diamond bracelet for Clara. Ethan leaned forward, his laptop already open. I've started tracing the accounts you mentioned. Nate's been funneling money into shell companies, some under his name, some under Clara's, and moving it offshore. The kicker? He turned the screen toward her, showing a familiar account number. He's been using your company's accounts as part of the transfer chain. Inflated invoices, false vendor payments. It's classic laundering. Isabella's stomach tightened. So he's risking my business to hide his money. Not just risking, Ethan corrected. If this comes out before we're ready, your company could be implicated unless we control the narrative and the evidence. Graham, who had been listening quietly, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, deliberate. If we go to war now, Nate will bury the money deeper, destroy documents, and make you look unstable. We need him to believe you have no idea. The more confident he feels, the more mistakes he'll make. She met his gaze. You're saying I have to play along? Yes, Graham said, sliding a leather-bound folder toward her. We'll use everything you photographed as a starting point, but we'll need hard copies, electronic records, and witnesses who can confirm his intent. Once we have that, we can hit him from every angle: divorce, financial fraud, even criminal charges if the DA's office takes interest. Ethan closed his laptop. Think of this as a chess match. Right now, he thinks you're a pawn he can remove from the board, but we're going to make sure you're the queen. Isabella sat back, taking a slow breath. The fury from last night still burned, but now it had direction, form. Fine, she said finally. I'll smile at him over dinner. I'll let Clara think she's winning, and I'll keep my head down. But when the time comes, she let the sentence hang, her expression making it clear what she intended. Graham gave a thin smile. When the time comes, Mrs. Hartman, he won't even see the checkmate until it's already over. At home, she greeted Nate with the same warmth she'd shown for years, listened to his stories about long days at the firm, and even joined him for dinner twice at his favorite restaurants. Every smile, every laugh was calculated. Behind the scenes, her team was pulling at threads Nate didn't know were exposed. Ethan's research confirmed a disturbing pattern. Several of Isabella's regular Italian suppliers had sent invoices for custom furniture and rare marble, orders she recognized, but the amounts billed to her company were far higher than the actual cost. The extra funds had been wired to an intermediary account, then funneled into 3 different companies, all of which traced back to Clara Benson. On paper, it was cleverly disguised. In reality, the trail was clear to anyone who knew where to look. To add pressure without tipping their hand, Graham hired a private investigator named Laura Price, a former federal agent with an eye for detail. Within days, Laura sent Isabella a series of high-resolution photographs. Nate and Clara stepping out of a sleek black sedan in Carmel by the Sea, their expressions relaxed, even playful, as they shook hands with a luxury real estate agent outside a glass-walled oceanfront property. Another photo showed Clara holding a glossy brochure for the home, Nate standing close enough to brush her arm as they spoke. The images confirmed what Isabella already suspected. They were building a future together, funded by money they had stolen. She forwarded the photos to Graham with a simple message: add to file. Meanwhile, she began her own quiet campaign. Over coffee with Vivian Cole, San Francisco's most influential society columnist, Isabella casually mentioned how busy Nate had been with new projects at the firm, how indispensable his paralegal had become, and how she'd heard they were traveling for client meetings in Monterey and Carmel. Her tone was light, the kind of harmless gossip Vivian could sprinkle into her column without anyone suspecting a motive. 2 days later, a short paragraph appeared in the Sunday paper. Prominent attorney Nathaniel Hartman was spotted in Carmel by the Sea last week, reportedly scouting properties for an undisclosed client. His trusted paralegal, Clara Benson, was by his side, as always. When Nate saw the piece over breakfast, he smirked and shook his head. "Vivian will write about anything," he said, sipping his coffee. Isabella smiled back, pretending to agree, while noting how easily he dismissed it. Exactly as planned, he felt untouchable. What he didn't know was that every harmless detail she planted was another breadcrumb, leading him deeper into the trap she was building. The threads of his perfect cover story were starting to unravel, and soon, the whole fabric would fall apart. "A woman named Margaret Chen is here to see you. She says it's urgent." The name made her pause. Margaret had been Nate's senior paralegal for over a decade, a quiet but razor-sharp presence at the firm. She had retired suddenly the year before with little explanation. Isabella told them to send her up. When the elevator doors opened, Margaret stepped out in a tailored navy coat, carrying a slim leather briefcase. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a weight Isabella recognized. Someone carrying a secret for far too long. "Thank you for seeing me," Margaret said once they were in Isabella's office, the door closed behind them. "I've been following certain developments in the news. The mention of Nate and Clara in Vivian Cole's column told me you might finally be ready to hear what I have." Isabella gestured for her to sit. Her curiosity sharpened. "Go on." Margaret set the briefcase on the desk and opened it with deliberate care. Inside were neatly organized folders and a thick, spiral-bound notebook. Nate and Clara's relationship didn't start after I left. It began at least a year earlier. I suspected something was wrong when I noticed case files going missing from the secure server. Documents would reappear later, altered, or not at all. When I checked the access logs, Clara's name kept showing up, even for files she shouldn't have been able to open. She slid a folder across the desk. "These are copies of Nate's private calendar. He kept 2 versions, the official one for the firm and this, the real one. It shows meetings with Clara outside of work hours, trips labeled as client travel that match weekends they spent together in Napa and Los Angeles. There are also recurring appointments with Richard Hale, another attorney at the firm, who specializes in managing offshore accounts." Isabella opened the folder, scanning the neat columns of dates and notes. The pattern was unmistakable. Long before Nate had spoken of divorce, he and Clara had been building a financial escape plan, brick by brick. Margaret leaned in slightly. They used Richard to create shell companies in multiple states, then funneled client funds through them. I confronted Nate about irregularities once, quietly. A week later, I was told my position was being retired with a generous severance. The message was clear: take the payout and stay silent. "Why come to me now?" Isabella asked, her voice steady though her pulse quickened. "Because you're doing what I couldn't," Margaret replied simply. "And I want to see this finished." She tapped the spiral notebook. "These are my personal notes from that time. Every discrepancy, every suspicious transfer, every meeting that didn't add up. I've kept them safe in case they were ever needed." For a moment, Isabella just looked at her, recognizing the courage it took to bring this forward. "Margaret, this could blow the case wide open." Margaret gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the point. I may not work at the firm anymore, but I still know where the bodies are buried, and I'm ready to help you dig them up." As Isabella walked her out, she felt the pieces locking into place. With Margaret's records, they could prove not only Nate's betrayal, but the depth of his premeditation, enough to dismantle every defense he might try. The allies she hadn't expected had just handed her the sharpest weapon yet. Nate was front and center in the coverage, striding into the courthouse in tailored suits, flanked by cameras, his reputation as a star defense attorney on full display. Isabella had followed the case from a distance, knowing Graham and Ethan were watching closely for an opening. That opening came sooner than expected. One brisk morning, Graham called her with a note of controlled excitement. "We've arranged for you to be added to the witness list. Last minute. Nate won't see it coming. When you testify, just present the records exactly as they are. No accusations. Let the prosecutor connect the dots." The following day, Isabella walked into the packed courtroom. She wore a fitted charcoal suit, her hair pulled back neatly, the picture of calm professionalism. The bailiff called her name, and she stepped up to be sworn in. From the defense table, Nate finally looked up from his notes. For the first time since she'd known him, his expression faltered. "Mrs. Hartman," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your role at Hartman Events?" "Yes," Isabella said evenly. "I'm the founder and CEO. We handle high-end corporate and private events, including several for Mr. Lang's companies over the past 2 years." She produced a binder of invoices, payment records, and bank statements, all legitimate transactions from her business to Lang's companies. On their own, they were above board, but as the prosecutor guided her through the details, the amounts and dates lined up suspiciously with transfers in Lang's financial records, transfers that had been flagged as part of the alleged embezzlement. When Nate stood to cross-examine her, his tone was smooth but a shade too controlled. "Mrs. Hartman, isn't it true these were simply routine payments for services rendered?" "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "For the events we provided, these payments are standard. But I can't speak to what happened after the funds left our account." The room seemed to still at her words. Jurors glanced at each other, pens scratching notes. The implication was subtle but unmistakable. Once the payments left her company, they might have been redirected. And Nate, as Lang's attorney and her husband, would have known exactly how. From the gallery, Isabella caught sight of Clara sitting stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. The color had drained from her face. She knew what this meant, that the tidy financial web they had spun together now had loose threads hanging in public view. Nate tried to regain control, shifting topics quickly, but his questions grew less focused. Twice, the judge had to remind him to keep the examination relevant. Isabella kept her tone neutral, never offering more than what was asked, yet each answer seemed to tighten the noose. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, the energy in the room had shifted. Nate's confident posture had slumped slightly, his pen tapping against his notes in a restless rhythm. Outside the courthouse, cameras caught him leaving without his usual smile, Clara trailing behind, avoiding eye contact with reporters. Inside, Isabella rejoined Graham and Ethan in the hallway. "He's rattled," Graham murmured with satisfaction. The jurors saw it, the prosecutor saw it, and most importantly, Nate felt it. For the first time since this had begun, Isabella allowed herself a small private smile. The cracks in his perfect facade had begun to show, and once they appeared, They were only going to spread. When her assistant buzzed in with an unexpected message. "There's a Robert Anderson here to see you. He says it's urgent." She set her pen down, hiding her surprise. Anderson was one of Nate's biggest clients, a tech CEO with an empire of patents and government contracts. If he was coming to her privately, it meant something had shifted. "Send him in," she said. Anderson stepped into her office looking nothing like the confident executive she'd seen in photographs. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. He didn't bother with small talk, pacing instead in front of her desk. "I've been going over my project accounts," he began abruptly. "After your testimony, I had my internal auditors dig deeper. The numbers don't match the reports Nate's been giving me." Isabella kept her voice neutral. "How so?" "There's money missing. Significant amounts. Payments to vendors I've never heard of. Invoices that don't match the work done. And when I followed the trail..." He stopped pacing, fixing her with a hard look. "Some of those payments went through your company before landing in offshore accounts. I don't believe you were part of it, but I know Nate was." She leaned back, measuring her words. "You're right. He's been using my business as part of his laundering scheme. I have proof. Bank statements, transfer records, even witness notes. Enough to show exactly how the money moved from your projects into his control." Anderson exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. "If I bring this to the prosecutors, they'll come after me too. The optics are terrible, and I'm already under scrutiny." "That's why I'm offering a deal," Isabella said. "You cooperate fully. You testify to what you know about Nate's methods and confirm the records I have. In return, my attorney will work with the DA to position you as a victim of fraud, not a co-conspirator." He studied her for a long moment, the weight of his options visible in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "If it's between going down with him or saving myself, I choose survival. Send everything you've got to my legal team. I'll call the DA's office before the day is out." Isabella extended her hand, and Anderson shook it firmly. "One more thing," she said. "Don't warn him. Let him believe you're still in his corner until the prosecutors are ready." A faint, humorless smile crossed Anderson's face. "I can do that. If Hartman thought he was the smartest man in the room, he's about to find out otherwise." When he left, Isabella stood at her office window, watching him disappear into the stream of traffic below. For the first time, Nate's own client was switching sides. And with Anderson's cooperation, the trap they'd been setting was about to close with devastating force. He suggested a private villa in Carmel by the Sea, the same place they had celebrated an anniversary years earlier. Isabella accepted without hesitation, masking her satisfaction. She knew exactly what he was planning: to serve her divorce papers in the very setting that had once symbolized their love. What he didn't know was that she had already rewritten the script. In the days leading up to the trip, she made quiet arrangements. Monica cleared her schedule. Graham confirmed his availability. Ethan coordinated with federal agents, ensuring their presence without alerting the resort staff. Anderson, now firmly allied with her, agreed to be there with his statement in hand. Margaret brought the meticulous records she had guarded for over a year, the final nail in Nate's defense. When they arrived in Carmel, the villa was every bit as beautiful as it had been years before. High ceilings, ocean views, and a private path leading down to a crescent-shaped beach. Nate played the devoted husband, pouring wine on the terrace, brushing her shoulder as he passed, all while keeping his phone close. Isabella matched his performance, smiling at the right moments, even letting him believe she was touched by the gesture. On their second evening, Nate suggested a private dinner on the beach, complete with candles and a catered menu. "Just us," he said, his tone warm. She agreed, knowing that just us wouldn't be the reality. As the sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of gold and rose, Isabella walked with him down the torchlit path to the dining setup. The table was draped in white linen, rose petals scattered across it, wine glasses waiting. Nate looked at her with the satisfaction of someone certain of victory. "I have something for you," he began, reaching into his jacket pocket. "So do I," Isabella replied. From the shadows beyond the torches, figures emerged: Monica, Graham, Ethan, Anderson, and Margaret. Behind them came 2 federal agents in dark suits, their badges catching the firelight. Nate froze, his hand still in his pocket. "What is this?" The lead agent stepped forward. "Nathaniel Hartman, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." From the dunes, another agent approached with a man in tow: Richard Hale, the co-conspirator attorney named in Margaret's records. His expensive shirt was rumpled, his face drawn tight. Nate's composure cracked. "You can't do this here. This is private property." "Jurisdiction isn't an issue," the agent replied evenly. "The evidence is overwhelming." Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly bound set of papers. "Here," she said, extending them to Nate. "My own divorce filing. It includes a complete accounting of every hidden asset you tried to shield. Properties, accounts, jewelry, all of it." His eyes flicked over the first page, his face draining of color. "How?" "I learned from the best," she said softly, "and then I made sure you taught me everything you'd regret later." The agents took him by the arms, reading him his rights. Richard Hale was led away separately, his head down. Clara wasn't there. Her own reckoning would come later. Isabella stood still as the sound of the ocean filled the silence between torchlight and waves. She watched Nate being escorted up the path, his figure growing smaller against the glow of the villa lights. Monica came to stand beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" "I will be," Isabella replied. "This was the ending he planned for me. I just made sure it became his instead." Her event design company now had branches in Los Angeles, Seattle, and Austin, each thriving under the wave of public admiration she'd received for helping expose Nate's crimes. The media had followed every turn of his trial, portraying her not as a victim, but as a strategist who had outplayed one of the city's most prominent attorneys. The momentum had fueled more than just business growth. With Graham and Ethan's guidance, she launched the Hartman Foundation for Women's Financial Empowerment, named not to honor her marriage, but to reclaim the name she had once shared with him. The foundation offered free financial literacy workshops, legal aid clinics, and one-on-one consulting for women navigating divorce or financial disputes. Margaret became the foundation's lead advisor, training volunteers to spot the warning signs of hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. On a bright autumn morning, Isabella stepped onto the stage of the San Francisco Women's Leadership Conference. The ballroom was filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and students, all waiting for her keynote. Cameras flashed as she took the microphone, her voice steady and warm. "6 months ago," she began, "I thought I was watching my life collapse. I learned my husband had betrayed me, both personally and financially, and he intended to leave me with nothing. But here's what I discovered. Betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the blueprint for something greater." She told them, without bitterness, how she had gathered her team, played along, and used patience as her sharpest weapon. She spoke of the quiet allies who stepped forward: Monica, Ethan, Graham, Margaret, and even Robert Anderson, each helping her build the case that would dismantle Nate's scheme. She described how, in the aftermath, she realized her true strength wasn't just in surviving, but in creating a path for others to do the same. "In the end," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, "Nate thought he was writing my ending. Instead, he wrote my prologue. And now," she smiled, "I hold the pen." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. In that moment, Isabella felt no trace of the woman who had once stood frozen outside a library door on her birthday. She was something else entirely now. Not just a survivor, but an architect of her own life, and a guide for countless others ready to take back theirs.